Do you think you have poor conversational skills in Spanish and you just think that every time that you try to have a conversation in Spanish, it doesn't seem to get anywhere? Don't even worry about it. Let's talk about some things that will really develop your conversational skills in Spanish. The first tip that I have for you is to be very patient. Now, recently I had an Uber driver who was a Spanish speaker. So this was a great opportunity to have a conversation in Spanish. And it took about 20 minutes for me to get to my destination. So we had a nice long conversation for 20 minutes. But could you imagine trying to navigate a conversation for 20 minutes in Spanish? Crazy, right? Although this conversation in Spanish was quite smooth, there were some moments where I was a little bit confused because my Uber driver would have very long pauses. So I didn't know exactly how to take those long pauses. What exactly was going on there? Should I say something to her and ask her a question, or do I just sit here and not say anything because the conversation is now over? So those are the type of thoughts that were going through my mind when she was having these long pauses, but then eventually she would say something. So that's something to keep in mind right there, that some people have different ways of communication, or they just speak differently, right? Some people may think for a few seconds before they start talking again, or they just talk constantly and you can barely say anything in return. Long pauses and complete silence in a conversation in Spanish can be very uncomfortable at times. So you really have to figure out, how do I navigate these types of moments? So this is why I'm always actively listening to the Spanish speaker that I'm talking to so I can understand how to navigate the conversation better. As well, I'm having a lot of patience, because if we don't have patience, right, something that I've noticed is that we tend to internalize all these long pauses and also the silence as well in a negative manner. So that's why my second tip here for how you can improve your conversational skills in Spanish is to not take things personally. This is a very bad habit to have, and I've been trying to get rid of this habit for over the past few years now. So again, going back to my example with my Uber driver, some other thoughts that were going through my head were, okay, so is she pausing because she can't understand me? She's confused about something, or I said something stupid. So I'm just bashing myself, I'm criticizing myself because she paused. But her pausing doesn't have to do anything to do with me, right? It could just be she is thinking about what she wanted to say. And in this case, I know that was one of the reasons why she was pausing, because after she would pause, she would continue to talk about what she was just talking about, but she would add more, or she would ask me a question about something that we just talked about. So definitely have to be very careful when it comes to these pauses, because all these things could be coming to our head or our heads as well. I know in other conversations as well. So very similar, I am overthinking everything. I'm thinking about, okay, I made a grammar mistake, I made a pronunciation mistake, maybe I offended this person, they don't like me, or just in general, they don't want to have a conversation with me. And I know, especially a few years ago, when I was really developing my Spanish speaking skills, and it was really difficult for me to say sentences in Spanish without a lot of pauses. So I thought that these long pauses that they were having, I thought that when they would make a lot of pauses, it was because my Spanish wasn't good enough, so they didn't want to have a conversation in Spanish with me. So again, all of these very negative thoughts that are very unnecessary. And just because the Spanish speaker that I'm talking to is pausing. So be very, very careful, because as you can see, there are many consequences when we have this very bad habit. And in addition, your anxiety can increase. And now that you are very insecure and you're anxious, you're overthinking and thinking about very negative things, this can really prevent you from wanting to speak Spanish. So you may decrease the amount that you are speaking Spanish with this person, or you could just stop speaking Spanish completely and just end the conversation. And that is definitely not what I want for you, because that is not a good experience. Unfortunately, I've had many of those bad experiences. Alright, in addition to this video, I have 3 other resources that can help you improve your conversational skills in Spanish. And they are my 2 free PDFs, the Spanish Conversation Blueprint and the Spanish Vocabulary Blueprint, and my Spanish Resource Kit that is $10 and has over 60 different resources like TV shows, YouTube channels, and songs. All those are linked down below in the description box. Now, the next tip that I have for you to improve your conversational skills in Spanish is to ask follow-up questions. So basically, a Spanish speaker says something to you right in a conversation, and then you would ask a question that is tied to the last thing that they just said. So for example, with my Uber driver, she told me that she was from Mexico. Okay, then I asked her what part of Mexico was she from, and then I also asked her how long has she been living in the United States for, and then I also asked her where does she like living better? Does she like living in Mexico better, or does she like living in the United States better? So that was a really good way to navigate this conversation. As well, she mentioned that the chiles in Texas are not the same as the chiles in Mexico. So then I asked her about that as well. I'm like, okay, well, are the chilies, are they spicier here or are they spicier in Mexico? So it was really fun to ask these questions because I was learning a lot. I was learning a lot about this person, but then again, I was also learning about a little bit more about Mexican culture. So I'm very nerdy in that way. I just keep asking follow-up questions so I can learn more and more. Now, she also explained about how she was teaching, or how she used to teach Spanish in school. So she used to teach kids Spanish in school. And then after that, she just paused. So there was some silence there, and I was trying to figure out, again, what do I do with this silence? And instead of asking her a question, I just started to kind of expound more on what she was talking about. So I just started to talk a little bit more about my experience and kind of what I have noticed in the United States. I was like, oh, in the United States, it is becoming more popular to learn Spanish. There's a lot more bilingual schools, and diversity is really big as well. So if there are long pauses and silence in a conversation, you don't always have to ask a question to that Spanish speaker to fill in that void, You can just start talking about whatever. And the interesting thing is sometimes they may respond to what you just said, and other times maybe they won't. But again, don't take it personally if they don't. Maybe they just heard exactly what you said, but they're just thinking about it and they don't really have a response to it. So this all has to do with how do we navigate these conversations, especially when they can be quite uncomfortable, right? There are a lot of different ways that you can be creative in these conversations. Another great way to improve your conversational skills in Spanish is to have many conversations in Spanish. So you really have to push yourself to increase the amount of conversations that you are having. As well, you may have to confront your fear and your insecurities, like I have had to do many times for the conversations that I've had, because again, it can be very uncomfortable, but if you don't push yourself, if you don't get comfortable with being uncomfortable, you are just not going to have that conversation in Spanish, right? Because you're just like, nah, that's too uncomfortable. I'm not ready for it yet. But just like with any other skill, let's say for speaking Spanish, at first it's very difficult to do. Okay, I can only say these few words and these few phrases. Okay, now I can speak for a minute. I can have a conversation for a minute. Now I can have a conversation for an hour. I have a lot of vocabulary. I have good knowledge of grammar, and I can talk about many different things. I can have a conversation for an hour. Now I can have a conversation for 2 hours. It's kind of the same idea there. So it's just nonstop improving your conversational skills through having conversations in Spanish. As well, one thing that may help you as well is to have a lot of reflection. So for example, this video that I'm recording right now is a reflection on the conversation that I had with my Uber driver. And I'm analyzing the whole conversation, and the whole point of me having this reflection as well is trying to figure out how can I improve my conversational skills. So how could I have had a better conversation in Spanish? Are there some things that I need to do to improve my conversational skills? Can I ask different questions? Could I have not said something in a certain time or at a certain time? Things like that. So do a lot of reflection so you can figure out how you can improve your conversations. And this is going to help you out a lot because there are always different ways that we can improve our conversational skills. I hope these tips give you confidence and motivate you and inspire you and also give you more peace of mind because now you know how to navigate conversations in Spanish a little more. Thank you very much for watching this video, and if you enjoyed it, make sure that you share it with your language learning friends. Hasta la próxima.